Kevan Lannister stood on the eastern battlements of the Red Keep, eyes drifting across the black waters of Blackwater Bay as pale dawn light washed over the city. The gulls swooped and wheeled, crying their shrill greetings to the new day, and the wind carried the tang of salt and the distant scent of fish from the harbor. Somewhere far below, the city had begun to stir. Bakers at their ovens, early traders readying their goods, the occasional clatter of hoofbeats on cobblestones. King's Landing always seemed so alive at this hour, when the day's heat had not yet descended, and when folk started about their business with a kind of guarded hope. Kevan took a measured breath and let it pass slowly through his nose. He was no stranger to this city. He'd been here many times, especially during the reign of his older brother's friend-turned-rival, King Aerys II Targaryen, but everything felt different now that he held the title of Hand of the King. Robert Baratheon had asked it of him. More accurately, the king had demanded it in one of his boisterous, meaty-handed gestures that brooked no refusal. Tywin Lannister had declined the appointment some years before. Kevan had long suspected his brother Tywin found King Robert lacking in certain qualities. But Kevan was a different man than Tywin, more pragmatic in some ways. And there was something in Robert's honest, if often misguided, heart that appealed to him. Kevan had never sought power or glory the way Tywin did, nor fame the way Jaime did, nor even cunning influence as Cersei seemed to crave. He wanted to serve, competently and loyally, and keep his family safe and strong. If Robert Baratheon thought that made Kevan the best man for the job, so be it. The day Kevan had knelt before the Iron Throne to be invested with the Chain of the Hand, the great hall had echoed with courtiers' murmurs. The Lannisters were now firmly at the center of power in the realm. Cersei was queen and Kevan was Hand. When Robert had clapped him on the shoulder as though they were old comrades in arms, Kevan had nearly staggered from the force of it. There had been feasting that night, of course, and the new Hand drank sparingly while Robert made the rounds of toasts, more interested in his cups than in hearing speeches. Varys, the spymaster, was all simper and soft voice, offering compliments in Kevan's ear. Littlefinger teased him with half-formed jests about the new alliance. Grand Maester Pycelle, carefully stooped, weighed down by his chain, seemed quietly relieved. And Cersei had given her uncle a close-lipped smile that never quite reached her eyes. At the end of that night, Kevan found himself alone in his new tower chambers, reflection flickering in a gilded mirror, clad in a nightshirt while half a dozen candles burned around him. He'd thought of Dorna, his wife, back at Casterly Rock, and their children. A sense of responsibility crushed down on his shoulders, making the newly bestowed Chain of the Hand feel heavier than any real metal could. He turned away from the sunrise. It was time to see to the day's matters, and those would be many. The weight of power was the weight of 1,000 small tasks, decisions upon decisions, all of which shaped the realm. Kevan's immediate concern was the crown's debt, which he had glimpsed in the ledger's Littlefinger had sent him a fortnight ago. The sums had appalled him. Borrowed wealth to fund tournaments, the royal fleet, the rebuilding of certain districts after various fires, of which King's Landing always seemed to have too many, and the lavish feasts and hunts King Robert adored. With Tywin's gold propping up the monarchy in large part, Kevan found himself treading the line between prudent statesmanship and raw nepotism. He had no desire for the realm to see the Lannisters as controlling the crown's purse strings. If anything, he wanted to extricate the crown from its dependence on Lannister gold and restore a balanced treasury. But that would require convincing Robert of certain realities, and the king hated hearing about money almost as much as he hated hearing about caution. In his solar, Kevan summoned Lancel, his eldest son, who had come with him to King's Landing. Lancel was eager to serve, though Kevan privately worried that the boy took too much after his cousin Jaime in his vanity and not enough of Tywin's or Kevan's steadiness. But with patience, Kevan intended to guide him. As the door opened, Kevan lifted his gaze from the small mountain of parchment that littered the desk. Lancel bowed. Though Kevan was not one to stand on rigid ceremony within his own family, he appreciated Lancel's sense of respect. "Is it time, father?" the boy asked. He still had that reedy tone of uncertain youth. Kevan nodded, rising. "Yes, we'll speak with the king after his morning meal. Have you arranged the matters I requested?" Yes, father. I've made sure Lord Baelish will be in attendance. Also, Ser Barristan's come by to see if you need him for anything. Kevan considered that. Barristan Selmy was Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, an honorable, seasoned knight who'd served under 3 kings. Having a man like Barristan near was reassuring. He wanted to foster a genuine alliance with men of good repute. Jaime's membership in the Kingsguard was another matter, but Kevan didn't allow his mind to dwell on that now. Tell Ser Barristan I'd appreciate his counsel after the meeting with the king, he said. The crown might do well to show some presence in the city to maintain the peace. The gold cloaks can handle most trouble, but you can never be too prepared. Lancel acknowledged the order and left. Kevan rolled up 2 scrolls, both containing carefully considered figures, and slid them into a leather case. He suppressed a sigh. Money, money, money. A kingdom could not be ruled on swords alone. That had always been Tywin's belief, and in many ways it was Kevan's as well. Let the kings wave their swords about, but the realm would crumble if its finances rotted from the inside. He remembered the uneasy look on Cersei's face when he'd first mentioned the debts to her. Her response had been sharp, almost scornful. We are Lannisters. Our coffers are always full. Kevan had not argued with her then. In truth, the Lannisters' own wealth was vast, though not infinite, and the crown's debts reached beyond Lannister gold, to the iron bank of bravos to other houses. Putting all that to right would take time, cunning, and a firm hand over Robert's impulses. As he strode down the corridor, gold lions adorning the red cloak that swung behind him, servants bowed. Even after a few weeks as hand, Kevan could feel the hush that seemed to follow him. It was the hush of both respect and wariness. The realm saw Tywin Lannister as a lion with claws unsheathed. Kevan was perhaps the lion in the background, but a lion all the same. The courtiers did not know him well yet, so they observed. That was fine. Kevan had no need to put on a brazen display. In the king's private solar, the reek of stale wine and the remnants of last night's roasted boar assaulted Kevan's senses. Robert sat sprawled in a cushioned seat, wearing a loose-fitting tunic that once might have showcased a warrior's physique, but now revealed a chest thickened by indulgence. His beard was unkempt, and a chunk of bread was stuck near his mustache. Over the years, King Robert Baratheon had let himself become almost a parody of his younger, heroic self. Yet beneath that heavy exterior, Kevan knew there still lurked the man who had slain Rhaegar Targaryen on the Trident, the man who had reformed the realm by force of will. Kevan, Robert boomed, thumping his fist on the table. Come in, come in. I'm about to devour this boar's leg. The cooks have outdone themselves. Have a seat, by the gods, you've got the look of Tywin about you today. All serious. Kevan inclined his head, taking a seat across from Robert. Majesty, I thought this morning we might discuss certain urgent matters. Robert's eyes flickered toward the leather case Kevan carried. Ah, the dreaded ledgers, no doubt. You're worse than my old master of coin. All right, out with it. Make it quick, though. I'm of a mind for a hunt. Kevan knew that hunts often meant more expense, more time away from council business, and sometimes more trouble. But Kevan also knew that it was dangerous to deny the king too many of his pleasures. Majesty, he began, setting the leather case on the table and drawing out 2 scrolls. I've reviewed the crown's debts thoroughly. The situation is concerning. My proposal is to consolidate some of the lesser debts by paying them off with the crown's immediate revenue, thus freeing us from higher interest in the long term. Robert's face adopted the same bored look Kevan had expected. Don't talk to me of interest and consolidation, Kevan. I never had the patience for it. That's what I have you for. Indeed, your grace, Kevan continued, ignoring the ache in his gut that told him this would be an uphill battle. My plan would require us to impose certain cost-saving measures at court. We could scale back on feasts, personal entertainments, certain extravagances like gilded tableware or new tapestries. Scale back on feasts? Robert boomed, as if Kevan had just suggested defanging lions. This is a royal court, not some beggar's hall. I won my throne by steel and lead my people by example. I won't be seen nibbling on hard bread and salt like a damned septon. Kevan kept his face neutral. Not to that extent, Your Grace. Merely a slight reduction. The realm must perceive that the king is mindful of the burdens on his people. The harvest was meager in some regions last season, and we must be careful that we do not appear oblivious to hardship. Robert frowned. Which regions? The Reach has had bountiful harvests, but certain areas in the Riverlands have seen flooding. The Stormlands, likewise, are recovering from storms. The new Master of Coin, Lord Baelish, believes we can manage it, but if we do not curtail certain expenses, we'll be forced to borrow more. And we already have borrowed quite heavily. Robert's expression soured at the mention of storms in his old homeland, as if it were a personal slight from the gods. Fine, he grumbled, tearing a hunk of bread and shoving it into his mouth. Fine, cut back a little. But I want my hunts, Kevan. Don't you dare deny me that. I would never dream of it, Your Grace, Kevan said, giving a slight bow of his head. We merely need to be strategic. A knock at the door interrupted them. A servant announced Lord Peter Baelish, who swept in with his characteristic smirk. His clothes were fine, though less ostentatious than some courtiers, and he moved with the grace of a fox about to make off with a hen. Kevan often found Baelish's manner disconcerting, but he also recognized the man's talents. Your Grace, Lord Hand, Baelish said with a flourishing bow. Am I interrupting an important lesson in sums? Robert waved a dismissive hand. We were just wrapping up. Kevan wants me to stop spending so many gold dragons on jellied eels and lace tablecloths, or so I gather. You'd have my job if I dared say it, sire, Baelish answered lightly. But if the hand insists, I shall adjust the accounts accordingly. Kevan held Baelish's eye for a moment. I'd like weekly reports on the treasury, Lord Baelish. The crown's debts can be brought under control, but only if we remain vigilant. Baelish bowed again, a slight tilt of the head. Your wish is my command, Lord Hand. Robert snorted. Good. Now enough of this. Kevan, you have what you need. I'm off to the yard to see if that new crossbow has arrived from Mir. Hells, I might try it out on some targets. Come along if you wish. Kevan stood, offering Robert another respectful nod. I'll attend to some other matters first, Your Grace. He watched the king stomp out, calling for a page to fetch his gauntlets. Then Kevan turned to Baelish. Would you join me for a short walk, my lord? Baelish's eyes glittered. Of course, it would be my pleasure. They walked through the corridors, accompanied by the occasional hush of maids and the nods of guards. Kevan kept his voice low. I want you to be honest with me, Lord Baelish. How bad is the treasury situation? Beyond the numbers we've already discussed. Baelish folded his arms behind his back, footsteps light on the stone floor. The crown owes the Lannisters the largest share, as you well know, but there are also considerable sums owed to the Iron Bank. They're patient to a point, but if payments aren't made on schedule, their patience evaporates quite quickly. And, well, there are always other lenders, Tyroshi spice merchants, Bravosi traders, some in Liss. It's a tapestry, my lord. Kevan nodded. I'd like your discretion in these matters. The king doesn't have the stomach for all the details, but we must proceed carefully. My discretion is well known, Lord Hand, Baelish said, smiling. Rest assured, I'll do everything in my power to keep the crown solvent. He paused, a slight frown crossing his face. If I may speak freely? Kevan gestured for him to continue. He wanted to hear what Littlefinger had to say. You're a level-headed man, Lord Kevan, much like your brother. But your style may not charm the king as easily as Tywin's sheer force of will might have. King Robert can grow restless with too much caution. And if that happens, others at court might take advantage of that restlessness. Kevan understood the warning. Cersei was one figure who might exploit Robert's discontent. Varys would certainly have his own designs. Even Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother, hovered in the background with his own ambitions. I appreciate the advice, he told Baelish. We'll keep the king content for now. That means letting him have his hunts, as he wants. But we'll keep an eye on the ledger and direct it as we can. Baelish tilted his head in a kind of congenial salute. I'm at your service. If there's nothing else, I should see to my other duties. That's all for now, my lord. Baelish departed, leaving Kevan in a gallery that overlooked a courtyard. From the high vantage, he could see the Red Keep's bustle. Squires running errands, pages carrying messages, knights at their training. One of those knights was the Kingslayer, Jaime Lannister, who had just disarmed a lesser-known member of the Kingsguard in a casual demonstration of skill. Kevan observed his nephew with a faint sense of pride, tempered by regret. Jaime had thrown away so much promise to join the Kingsguard at such a young age. But it was done, and no sense dwelling on it now. Kevan was about to turn away when he caught sight of Queen Cersei emerging onto a balcony across the courtyard. Clad in deep green silk embroidered with golden lions, she radiated authority. Two of her ladies-in-waiting hovered behind her, their faces half hidden by shadows. Cersei stared across the yard, golden hair catching the sun, looking toward Jaime as he ended his bout with a swift flourish. The look on her face was unreadable from this distance. Kevan knew better than to misread a Lannister's expressions. Cersei would be no simple subject even if Kevan was the hand and she the queen. In truth, the realm's peace might depend on how well Kevan could manage the interplay between Robert's boisterous reign and Cersei's ambitions. Tywin once said that a kingdom's stability relies not on the might of its armies alone, but on the cunning of those who rule. He sighed, thinking again of Dorna, of the quiet comfort of Casterly Rock. Yet here he stood in the middle of it all. Perhaps it was his duty, or maybe it was destiny. One did not choose one's family, but one could choose loyalty, and Kevan was loyal to a fault. He passed through a colonnade that led toward the Great Hall, careful to keep an unhurried pace that befitted his status. There he found Grand Maester Pycelle, bent over a new delivery of herbs from Dorne. The old man straightened and offered Kevan a deep bow. "My lord, might I have a moment of your time?" "Of course," Kevan said. Pycelle fell into step beside him, fingering his long white beard in that perpetually pompous way. "What do you need, Grand Maester?" "A matter of ravens, my lord. I have received troubling reports of increased raids along the Iron Islands coast. Lord Balon Greyjoy seems to be testing the boundaries of his father's old rebellions. The small folk are anxious. I believe we should send a firm response." Kevan glanced at him. "You suggest a display of naval strength?" Pycelle nodded, his chains jingling softly with the movement. "Yes, precisely. Remind the Ironborn that the Crown has not forgotten the price they paid for their last rebellion. A reminder might keep them in check." This was precisely the kind of matter Kevan expected to handle. Small flames that, if left unattended, could burst into a raging fire. "I'll speak to the king about it," he said. "We might dispatch a few ships under a trusted commander to keep watch on the Ironborn's movements. Thank you for bringing this to me, Maester. Anything else?" "Just this. There are rumors, unsubstantiated, of course, that Daenerys Targaryen has wed a Dothraki horselord. I have no proof yet, but Varys's little birds have been chirping. The king might want to know that the girl survived the sack of King's Landing and is now quite possibly with child." Kevan drew in a breath. "That's serious news. We should keep it under advisement, especially if Robert's hatred of the Targaryens flares at the thought of a potential heir across the narrow sea." The matter of the Targaryen exiles was a prickly topic that Tywin had once counseled be handled with finality. But that advice had been overshadowed by the passing of years and Robert's general disinterest in anything that didn't stand in front of him with a sword or a cup. Still, Kevan knew that the king had a deep, abiding hatred for House Targaryen and any potential threat to his throne. Pycelle pursed his lips. "Yes, we must tread carefully. I shall keep you informed, my lord." They parted ways in the great hall, where sunlight streamed through narrow windows onto the Iron Throne. The seat of power was empty now, the swords of past conquests gleaming. Kevan paused to stare at it. The seat was monstrous, uncomfortable by design, a constant reminder that ruling was no easy task. Robert hardly ever seemed comfortable upon that throne. Perhaps no one ever was. Tywin had once said that a king who sits easily on the Iron Throne has something to fear, for the comfort suggests complacency. Or was that a rumor about Aerys? Kevan couldn't remember, but it was all the same. Ruling was not meant to be comfortable. His day spiraled into the typical avalanche of tasks. 2 warring minor lords from the Crownlands arrived with grievances about contested river fishing rights. Kevan heard them out in the presence of a few bored courtiers, promising to send a royal clerk to survey the area and produce an impartial recommendation. A group of Braavosi merchants petitioned for lower port taxes. Kevan held firm, politely refusing their request, but suggesting a modest compromise in future trade agreements. A small scuffle between gold cloaks and local fishmongers was brought to his attention, the fishmongers claiming the guards had demanded bribes. Kevan tasked the city watch commander, Janos Slint, to investigate, though he had little confidence in Slint's integrity. Still, it had to be done. By midday, Kevan was already weary. The small folk might have romantic notions of power, but truly it was 1,000 small burdens, like a donkey laden with bricks. He did not complain. This was his duty, but in the back of his mind, the image of Casterly Rock and his younger children kept trying to intrude on his concentration. A man could yearn for simpler days, but as Hand of the King, simpler days were a memory left behind. When the sun had passed its zenith and shadows lengthened in the corridors, Kevan returned to his chambers to find a surprise guest waiting. Standing near the hearth, swathed in regal Lannister red and gold, was Cersei. She had sent her ladies away, though 2 gold cloaks lingered outside, presumably her personal guard. Kevan bowed slightly. "Your Grace, to what do I owe the honor?" Cersei's mouth curved into a thin smile. "Must there be a specific reason for me to visit my beloved uncle?" she asked, though her tone suggested there was indeed a reason. Kevan gestured for her to sit, which she did, crossing her legs with feline grace. She seemed to examine him for a moment, green eyes narrowing. "You have settled in quickly," she finally said. "Father must be proud." Kevan lowered himself into a chair opposite her. "I do my best. Is everything well, Cersei?" For a moment, she did not respond, allowing the tension to sit in the air. Then she leaned forward, voice hushed. "I want to speak about Robert. You have influence with him as Hand. Far more than I do at times. I'm concerned for his health." Kevan studied her face. Was this genuine concern, or some sort of maneuver? "He does seem to indulge quite often," Kevan said carefully. "Wine, feasting, hunts. He's not the man he once was. But I can hardly force him to change his ways if he doesn't wish it." Cersei's lips tightened. "No, you can't. But you can distract him, direct him. For the sake of our family, he shouldn't be allowed to squander everything on hunts and jests. Especially not now, with Joffrey growing older. The realm needs stability." Kevan nodded. "I agree the realm needs stability. But controlling Robert is like trying to tame a storm at sea. If I push too hard, he might push back harder. Then we gain nothing." Her eyes flickered with a hint of impatience. "You're a Lannister. Should you fear that oath?" "It's not fear," Kevan said calmly. "It's wisdom. Robert is the king, and he has certain rights and privileges. And if he feels cornered, he might lash out. That would serve no one, especially not House Lannister." Cersei exhaled, leaning back in her seat. "Very well, so we proceed with caution, but proceed nonetheless. I want Joffrey prepared to rule someday. I'm not blind to what the future holds. You see the treasury figures. If Robert leads us into ruin, Joffrey will inherit a crown of debts and dissatisfaction." Kevan let her words sink in. There was no question Cersei was ambitious for her son, and for House Lannister. He would be lying if he said he didn't share a concern for that future. "We'll do what we can. Speaking of Joffrey, how is he faring?" "I heard he's been receiving sword lessons from the Kingsguard." Cersei's mouth twitched in something resembling a proud smile. "He is. Jaime oversees some of his training at my behest, though Robert insists on letting other knights instruct him as well. Joffrey is quick if a bit impatient. He's a lion, and I won't have him overshadowed by anyone." Kevan paused. He'd heard the boy had a cruel streak. He'd seen glimpses of it himself in the short time since his arrival. But perhaps that was normal for children raised in power, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, it was not a conversation to have with Cersei at that moment. "Good," Kevan merely said. "I trust Jaime to instruct him well, though I hope the boy learns discipline. The realm won't be tamed by impulsiveness." Cersei gave a perfunctory nod. "You and I both know Jaime's skill with a sword. If the realm sees Joffrey as his cousin's pupil, that can only inspire confidence, at least in a martial sense." Her voice cooled. "I know you'll do what's best for the family, Uncle. Father always had a high opinion of your loyalty. Don't prove him wrong." With that, she rose, smoothing out her gown. Kevan stood as well, dipping his head. "Rest assured, everything I do is for the good of House Lannister and the realm, which in this case are bound together." Cersei's smile returned, sharper than before. "Yes, let us hope so," she said, then swept out of the room, the guards snapping to attention as she passed. Kevan sighed, alone once more. He felt the relentless churn of politics at work. Neither Cersei nor Robert had any desire to be overshadowed by the other, and Kevan was wedged between them, trying to keep the realm's ledger balanced and the king's appetites in check. At that moment, he thought that Tywin's refusal of the handship might have been more of a boon than a slight. Tywin had perhaps foreseen just how much of a thankless task it would be to serve Robert. But Kevan believed in duty. He had accepted, and now he must see it through. That evening, as the sun dipped over King's Landing, turning the rooftops to molten gold, Kevan convened a smaller council meeting to address the Ironborn raids that Pycelle had mentioned. Stannis Baratheon, master of ships, was not in the capital. He was in Dragonstone, as usual, rarely venturing to King's Landing unless summoned by Robert. In his stead, a clerk from the royal fleet offered the latest reports. Kevan listened carefully as the man detailed sightings of longships circling the coasts near Cape of Eagles, harassing merchant cogs. They had not staged major landings, but their presence was unsettling fishermen and traders alike. Lord Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother and master of laws, lounged in his seat. "You propose sending a few war galleys to chase them off?" he asked, sounding only mildly interested. Kevan nodded. "A show of force is likely enough to remind Balon Greyjoy of his place. We need not provoke a war, but if we ignore their raiding, they grow bold. I'd like to dispatch enough ships to be taken seriously, but not so many as to weaken our presence in Blackwater Bay. Perhaps Lord Renly, you can forward this plan to your brother Stannis for official approval. It is, after all, his domain." Renly toyed with a ring on his finger. "My brother is quite territorial when it comes to the fleet. But yes, I'll make certain he's informed. I'm sure he'll say yes. It's not as though we're going to invade the Iron Islands." Baelish, sitting on the other side of the table, plucked at his well-groomed beard. "Such a small matter," he said with a voice of gentle admonishment. "Yet so many implications, wouldn't you say, Lord Hand? War is costly, and we can ill afford a new conflict." Kevan gave him a curt nod. "Exactly why we want to discourage Balon's ambitions before they become war. A few ships to chase off pirates is less expensive than mustering an entire fleet later." Renly gave an airy laugh. "Well spoken, my lord. I prefer smaller, cheaper wars too, if we must fight any." The man never seemed to take anything too seriously, except perhaps his own ambitions, which he hid behind a veneer of mirth. Varys was absent from the council that evening, citing some pressing matter of whispers in Flea Bottom. Kevan noted his absence silently. The spider always had his reasons, and often it meant meddling in the city's underbelly. Sometimes Kevan found Varys's constant game of secrets exhausting, though he recognized the spymaster's usefulness. Discretion was key, and Varys handled that well. After a few more minor items, the council disbanded, leaving Kevan and Baelish as the last ones in the chamber. The flickering light of braziers cast strange shadows on Baelish's face as he paused at the door, giving Kevan a meaningful look. "You handle them adeptly, Lord Hand. Even Renly, who is used to overshadowing the Master of Coin, is charmed. Careful you don't make an enemy of him by ignoring his vanity." Kevan closed a ledger. "Thank you for the advice. I shall keep it in mind." Baelish dipped his head and glided away. Left alone, Kevan realized just how heavy his eyes felt. He wanted nothing more than to find his bed, but the day was not yet over. A messenger knocked, bearing word that the king wanted him in the training yard. Kevan pressed his lips together, wondering what fresh chaos awaited him. With a hint of resignation, he made his way to the yard, only to find Robert Baratheon drunk, brandishing a massive warhammer as he roared challenges at a handful of knights. Servants clapped politely, while a concerned Barristan Selmy stood nearby, arms crossed. "Finally!" Robert exclaimed upon seeing Kevan. "My hand arrives. Care to swing a hammer with me, old friend? Or perhaps you prefer the sword?" Kevan forced a small smile. "I think we both know I'm a passable knight at best, your grace. You wouldn't have your counsel limping about, would you?" Robert laughed boisterously, sweat staining his brow. He lifted the hammer, letting the torchlight glint off the dark steel. "This, Kevan, is the pride of my youth. Had it specially made, just like the one I used to kill Prince Rhaegar. Gods, but I miss those days." Kevan glanced at Barristan, whose face betrayed a certain measure of disapproval. The old knight approached, bowing. "Your grace, perhaps we should continue practice tomorrow. You've had a long day and some wine," he added diplomatically. "Nonsense," Robert said, swinging the hammer in a wide arc. "I'll not be coddled like some wailing babe." He spun toward a training dummy and struck it with a deafening crash, splintering the wood. Servants scattered, flinching away from the burst of force. "Did you see that?" Robert crowed. "Haven't lost my strength yet." Kevan stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Majesty, might we discuss the issue of the Ironborn? You'd mentioned wanting to hear more about it." Robert's blood was up, excitement shining in his eyes. "Ironborn, eh? Euron Greyjoy, Balon Greyjoy, it's all the same to me. They're dogs. If they're nipping at the realm's heels, we'll crush them again." Kevan nodded, carefully guiding the conversation. "I propose dispatching a small squadron of war galleys to patrol the coast, just to keep them honest." "Small?" Robert scoffed, leaning on the hammer. "I'd send them the whole bloody fleet if I had it my way. Let them remember what happened last time they rose against me. Balon's rebellion was put down quick enough, wasn't it?" "Yes, your grace, but we don't want to spread our resources too thin. Perhaps a moderate force, enough to discourage them." Robert grunted. "Fine, a moderate force, but if they raise their banners, I'll see Pike in flames again." His mood, however, began to lose some of its edge as the wine in his veins settled. He tossed the hammer aside, letting a squire scramble to catch it. "I'll leave the details to you, Kevan," he said, clapping the hand's shoulder with a heavy hand. "You're a good man. That's why I made you my hand instead of the others sniffing around. I trust you." Kevan bowed. "I'm honored, your grace. Truly." Robert nodded, then sank onto a nearby bench, breathing heavily. "Of course, that might be the last good decision I make tonight. Gods, I'm tired." He gestured to a servant. "Get me more wine, or no ale, something cooler." Barristan moved to stand behind the king, resolute as ever, though Kevan noticed a flicker of concern in the older knight's eyes. Kevan wondered if Robert would survive the next 5 or 10 years at the rate he was going. That was a question too unsettling to dwell on. Instead, he offered the king a polite exit. "If your grace will excuse me, I've some urgent letters to send regarding the Ironborn. I'll see to them immediately." Robert waved him away, already guzzling from a mug the servant handed him. Kevan's footsteps felt heavy as he walked back through the yard, the night air wrapping him in its cool embrace. For a moment, he tilted his head up at the sky. The stars burned faintly through the haze that rose from the city's many fires. There were times, Kevan reflected, when he wished Robert would be just a fraction less of a warrior king and a fraction more of a statesman. But that was not Robert's way. Robert was a man of passions, not calculations. So Kevan would do the calculating for him, or at least attempt to. At last, Kevan returned to his tower. Lancel was waiting in the outer chamber, clearly fighting off sleep. "Father," he said, standing quickly, "is everything well?" "Yes, the king was in his cups again," Kevan replied. "Go on to bed, son. Tomorrow is another busy day." Lancel hesitated. I wanted to say that it's an honor to be here to serve. I won't let you down." Kevan put a hand on his son's shoulder. He remembered Lancel as a small child, all wide eyes and golden curls, running through the halls of Casterly Rock. Now those curls had darkened and he was on the cusp of manhood, thrown into the deep waters of courtly intrigue. Kevan's voice softened. "I know you won't, but keep your wits about you, Lancel. King's Landing is a viper's nest. Never forget that." Lancel nodded solemnly and left for his own quarters. Kevan, once alone, removed the chain of the hand from around his neck, setting it gently on a table. The metal links glinted in the lamplight, each a symbol of the realm's burdens. He felt the ache in his shoulders, the tension behind his eyes. Tywin had carried this burden once, for the Mad King, and that had ended poorly. Now Kevan carried it for a very different king, but a king with his own flaws. He resolved to do better than the Mad King's council had. Still, a small voice in his mind whispered that the realm was never truly stable, that men like Robert could unravel it all with a rash decision or a moment of drunken rage. He lay in bed that night, staring at the carved canopy above him. In the silence, he thought of Tywin's lessons, how his brother had always demanded excellence and loyalty from everyone around him, but especially from Kevan. He recalled how Tywin had taught him that leadership was about more than just raw power. It was about control, about setting the stage so that others performed their roles to your design. Tywin had done it so masterfully that kings themselves had danced to his tune. Kevan had no such illusions of grandeur, but he intended to steer Robert as gently as he could. If that meant occasionally letting the king have his hunts and his feasts to keep him pliant, then so be it. As long as the realm was kept from ruin. Days bled into weeks and weeks into months. The routine of governance settled into place. Kevan held the small council meetings, conferred with Baelish on finances, heard Varys's reports of whispered conspiracies, monitored Renly's subtle attempts to curry favor among courtiers, and kept a watchful eye on Pycelle's messages from across the narrow sea. Now and again, Robert would vanish on a hunting trip, leaving Kevan de facto ruler in King's Landing. Occasionally, the king would ask Kevan to attend hunts with him, but Kevan demurred politely most of the time, citing the needs of governance. He did attend once or twice, purely to keep an eye on Robert's behavior, and to ensure that no accidents befell the king. During these hunts, Kevan noted how Robert's girth and heavy breathing hampered him, though his raw strength remained formidable. The king would slash through underbrush and tear after boar or stag with reckless abandon, cursing and laughing in equal measure. Kevan dreaded each clang of spear on armor, each furious squeal of a wounded boar, worried that if Robert took a tusk in the wrong place, the realm might be thrown into chaos. But each time, Robert returned triumphant, albeit bruised and sweaty, to brag about the kill and demand more wine. The Ironborn problem quieted, at least for now. The show of naval patrols had done its job, and Balon Greyjoy was silent, presumably stewing on pike. Kevan busied himself with tidying the crown's finances, making small but steady progress toward paying down the most critical debts. The Iron Bank demanded punctual interest, and Kevan ensured it was delivered. He even renegotiated some terms, using House Lannister's financial standing as a bargaining chip. However, he was careful never to present it as Lannister money, propping up the realm in official documentation. The last thing he wanted was for the realm to see Robert as a puppet of House Lannister. Appearances mattered. All the while, Kevan kept a cautious eye on Cersei, who sometimes made suggestions about appointments to the City Watch or to lesser posts within the Red Keep. She would smile sweetly, praising Kevan's sense of duty, while insinuating that it might be beneficial to place men loyal to House Lannister in strategic positions. Kevan saw the sense in some of it. After all, loyal men were always preferable to disloyal ones. But he had to maintain a balance. Too many Lannisters in power, and it might foster resentment among the other great houses. Still, he did not entirely reject her suggestions. On the matter of the city watch, Kevan carefully replaced a few of Janos Slint's lieutenants with men he believed more trustworthy. A subtle shift that Slint didn't dare protest since it came from the hand of the king. When rumors surfaced that Daenerys Targaryen might be pregnant by Khal Drogo, Kevan found his biggest challenge yet. Varys confirmed it was more than a rumor. The exiled Targaryen princess was indeed with child, the babe potentially having a claim, however distant, on the Iron Throne. Robert's fury was immediate and absolute. Storming into the council chamber with a scowl that made lesser lords shrink, he bellowed for Kevan, for Renly, for Baelish, and for Varys all at once. Cersei arrived as well, an eager light in her eyes that Kevan recognized as that cunning spark she had when events might turn to her advantage. Robert slammed a heavy fist onto the council table, rattling inkpots and scattering quills. "I want them dead," he said, voice thick with rage. "All of them. That silver-haired wench and her unborn child, that beggar brother of hers. Any Targaryen that lives, I want them in the ground." Kevan exchanged a look with Varys, whose expression remained deceptively neutral. "Your Grace, the princess is in the Dothraki Sea. Reaching her will not be a simple matter." "Then we find a way," Robert snarled, spittle at the corner of his mouth. "Pay a sell's word. Hire the faceless men. Hells, even the mummers if they'll do the job." Cersei spoke up, her tone soft yet edged. "If you don't act, Your Grace, that child might grow to challenge our son someday. The Targaryen name still carries weight in some corners of the realm." Renly, arms crossed over his fine doublet, frowned. "Killing a pregnant girl, that's monstrous. Are we so afraid of shadows across the sea?" Robert whirled on him. "Was I afraid when I crushed Rhaegar on the Trident? Renly? Was I afraid when I put down Balon Greyjoy? I am not afraid. I am prudent. A dragon spawn is a threat, no matter how far away it seems." Kevan cleared his throat, thinking carefully. He knew Tywin's stance on eliminating threats before they grew. Tywin had orchestrated the sack of King's Landing, after all. Still, something felt unsettling about sending assassins after a pregnant girl in a land so far away. "Your Grace, perhaps we should consider the ramifications of such an act. If we fail, the Dothraki might unite behind her. Khal Drogo is said to be unstoppable in open field. And if we succeed, it might spark other problems. Word could reach Pentos, Lys, or Bravos that the crown is employing murderers to eliminate a girl. The Iron Bank might take that poorly, or the free cities could resent the interference." Cersei's lip curled. "Are you truly concerned with what the free cities think, uncle? They're mercenaries and slavers, half of them." Baelish interjected. "Even if we do not care about moral implications, we must consider the cost. A faceless man is extremely expensive. An unsuccessful attempt might only galvanize her supporters." Robert's face twisted with displeasure. "Don't talk to me of cost and moral implications. This is about my throne, no, the realm's stability. We are not murdering her for sport. We are preventing war, preventing a Targaryen from setting foot in Westeros and rallying men to her cause. By the gods, do I have to remind you all what happened the last time Targaryens tried to keep their crown?" He glowered around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. Cersei lowered hers almost demurely. Kevan held Robert's gaze, though his mind churned. Tywin would likely say that a single cutthroat across the narrow sea was a small price to pay for eliminating a potential dynastic threat. Yet Kevan recalled the story of Tywin's cold efficiency in dealing with Elia Martell and her children during the sack, an act that had stained the Lannister name in the eyes of many. Kevan had no illusions that the realm was kind, but was repeating that brutality wise? "Your Grace," Kevan began carefully, "we must weigh the risk. If the girl remains across the sea, perhaps her child will never see Westeros. She has no ships, no armies save for the Dothraki horde, which is not easily carried across the narrow sea. The Dothraki fear water." Robert grunted. "I remember hearing that. But men's fears can change when gold is offered. And if she births a son, half the lords still loyal to Targaryen might see him as a symbol." He slammed a fist again. "I won't have it." A long silence followed. Finally, Kevan exhaled. If we do this, it must be done with utmost secrecy and minimal risk of exposure. I suggest we discreetly contact an intermediary in Pentos or Lys who can arrange the matter. We do not involve the City Watch or any direct King's Landing agent. It must be entirely deniable. A harsh grin touched Robert's face. Yes, that's what I wanted to hear. Deniable. My father Jon Arryn would have done the same if he'd known Targaryens were breeding across the sea. We'll do it quietly, quickly, and no one will be the wiser. He looked at Varys, who stepped forward, inclining his head. See it done, the king told the spymaster. Find a way anyway. I'll not lose sleep over the death of a Targaryen. Varys's voice was smooth. I shall use my little birds most delicately, your grace. Renly looked disgusted, but he voiced no outright protest. Baelish made a note in a small ledger. Cersei's gaze slid to Kevan, her expression almost triumphant. Kevan felt a wave of unease settle in his gut. Was this truly the wisest path, or just the bloodiest? But Robert was determined, and Kevan was sworn to serve him. So he nodded, repeating the words that had always defined him. Yes, your grace. The meeting ended on that sour note, with Robert visibly relieved to have made a decision. Kevan hung back as the others drifted out. Varys paused by the door, turning back to give Kevan a sympathetic bow. A messy business, my lord. Let us hope it ends quickly. Kevan only nodded. Inside, he felt the stirrings of conflict. He'd known this job would require hard decisions, but he hadn't expected to orchestrate a covert assassination of a pregnant girl. Yet, if it truly prevented a larger war, was it not the lesser evil? Tywin would have answered yes without hesitation. Kevan hoped that the gods, if they cared, would forgive him for it. In the days that followed, the wheels were set in motion. Varys dropped cryptic comments about progress, about fresh alliances, in the free cities that could handle tasks requiring the utmost subtlety. Robert seemed satisfied enough, focusing again on his hunts and women. Cersei, on the other hand, seemed content, even smug, as if a threat to her children had been removed. Kevan went through the motions, approving funds through Baelish for unnamed intelligence efforts. He wondered what illusions or half-truths the spymaster used to cover those coins' true purpose. Perhaps that was best left unknown. Meanwhile, the realm's day-to-day governance continued. Kevan found himself mediating a dispute between House Redwyne and House Hightower about shipping rights in the Whispering Sound. He worked with Pycelle on securing grain shipments from the Reach to feed parts of the Stormlands stricken by storms. He even held a formal courtesy dinner for the ambassadors from Volantis, who were in Westeros hoping to establish a trade agreement. At that dinner, Robert was present, though barely interested. He spent most of the time flirting with a shapely Volantene attendant. Kevan had to step in to keep the proceedings amicable. All the while, Kevan struggled with his own sense of right and wrong. He'd never been an idealist, but neither was he comfortable with clandestine slaughter. Yet he told himself that the Targaryens had wrought untold horrors on the realm through their incompetent Mad King, that the rebellion had been just, and that Robert's fear of a Targaryen restoration was not without merit. The realm had spilt too much blood already. Another civil war could tear Westeros apart. If the life of one girl and her unborn child prevented that, then perhaps it was a necessary sin. He prayed it would be the last. Then, some weeks later, word reached King's Landing that Viserys Targaryen was dead, killed by the Dothraki themselves. That alone should have calmed Robert. But news also spread that Daenerys still lived, and her child grew in her belly. No mention of an assassination attempt. Varys dropped subtle hints that they were waiting for the perfect opportunity. Robert cursed and drank, wanting immediate results, but Kevan and Varys counseled patience. If the attempt was botched, the backlash could be far worse. During these tense days, Kevan discovered an unlikely ally in Ser Barristan Selmy. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was no friend to the Targaryens. He had served under Aerys and saw the atrocities. Yet he was a man of principle, whose sense of honor sometimes clashed with Robert's thirst for Targaryen blood. "She is but a girl, my lord," Barristan confided to Kevan in the privacy of the White Sword Tower's antechamber. What threat can she truly pose? Her brother was cruel and foolish, and he is gone. Perhaps she can be reasoned with, or her child might never set foot in Westeros. Kevan gave a weary nod. I've asked myself those same questions, Ser Barristan, but the king will not hear reason on this. He demands her life. Barristan's voice dropped, regret heavy in his tone. Then I shall follow my king's wishes, though I wonder if history will judge us harshly. Kevan grimaced. History judges the victors, Ser. Let us hope we remain among them. That was the bitter truth of politics in Westeros, and Kevan could do little to change it. So the wheels kept turning, and Kevan pressed forward with the other tasks of the realm. He oversaw improvements to the city walls, mindful of how ill-maintained King's Landing could become if left untended. He brokered trade pacts, welcomed minor lords seeking royal favor, listened to the pleas of peasants who'd traveled leagues just for a chance to see the hand or the king. He found a curious satisfaction in the methodical labor, the sense that at least in these small acts, he was doing good. Perhaps it balanced out the darker deeds behind the scenes. That was what he told himself, anyway. One morning, after another fruitless update from Varys about the situation with Daenerys, Kevan found himself restless. He decided to visit the royal armory to inspect the condition of the city's weapons. This was a duty usually left to the master of arms, but Kevan wanted a direct look. As he made his way there, he noticed Jaime sparring in a nearby yard, his golden hair tied back, sweat gleaming on his bare arms. Kevan watched quietly from the shadows as Jaime dispatched 3 sparring partners in rapid succession, his skill evident in every move. Lancel stood to the side, marveling at his cousin's prowess. When Jaime finally lowered his blade, Kevan stepped forward. Nephew, you haven't lost your edge. I wonder if you'll ever meet your match. Jaime smirked, wiping sweat from his brow. Perhaps one day. Not soon, I hope. Good day, uncle. Or should I say, Lord Hand? Kevan waved a hand. Just uncle is fine here, Jaime. How fares your service to the king? Jaime's face flickered with a moment of distaste. He's boorish, loud, and a drunk. But we've had worse, haven't we? He offered a sly grin, referencing the Mad King. At least Robert doesn't burn people alive. Kevan frowned slightly. He didn't appreciate the flippant tone, yet he couldn't deny the truth. Still, he's our king. We do our duty. Jaime huffed. Duty, yes. We Lannisters are full of it. But is that all there is, uncle? Duty to a kingdom that will never appreciate us. To a king who'd just as soon see us diminished if it suited him? I wonder. Kevan leveled a measured look at Jaime. If we did only what we were appreciated for, we would do very little in life. Or so your father used to say. Jaime shrugged, half smiling. Perhaps. You're a good man, uncle, and too often the good men are overshadowed by the cunning or the cruel. I suppose we'll see how it ends. Kevan nodded, clasped Jaime's shoulder briefly, and turned away. Jaime had always been brash, but Kevan heard genuine disillusionment under the bravado. Could anyone blame him? He was the Kingslayer, reviled by many for slaying the Mad King, though in truth that act likely saved thousands of lives. History was never kind, especially not in these games of thrones. When Kevan reached the armory, the master armorer walked him through racks of swords, spears, and shields. We've got enough arms to outfit 2,000 men, Lord Hand, and more if we stretch it. The steel is decent, forged here or in the Crownlands. We do get the best steel from the Westerlands, as you know. The man looked eager to please. Good, Kevan said, running a hand along the cool steel of a well-crafted long sword. He thought about how the realm was always one decision away from chaos, be it from the Ironborn, the Targaryens, or even the simmering tensions among the 7 kingdoms themselves. House Stark in the north, House Tyrell in the Reach, House Martell in Dorne. They all had their own interests. If Robert's reign faltered, if the crown proved incompetent or burdened with debt, these great houses might see an opportunity. And if the Targaryen girl somehow returned, Kevan set the sword back, the clang echoing in the musty air. He offered the armorer a curt nod. Carry on. He spent more time than necessary in the armory, simply because it gave him a moment's respite from the unending swirl of politics. Surrounded by steel, Kevan felt grounded in something tangible. Swords were straightforward. You swung them, you blocked with them, you sharpened them. They did what they were meant to do without guile. It was the men and women wielding them who were complicated. Eventually, though, he had to return to the royal tower and face the next wave of petitions and problems. That afternoon, a tension thrummed in the castle corridors. Whispers flew from servant to servant, from guard to guard. Kevan picked up fragments. The king was in a rage. The queen and Joffrey had quarreled. Something about a direwolf in the Riverlands. Kevan was still piecing together the rumors when a courtier approached to summon him urgently to the throne room. Arriving there, Kevan saw the entire court abuzz. Robert sat on the Iron Throne, flushed and furious, while Lady Catelyn Stark stood before him, proud and defiant. Next to her was a subdued boy with stark gray eyes, Bran Stark, if Kevan recalled correctly, and near them was Eddard Stark, the solemn warden of the North, who had arrived in the capital weeks earlier to consult on some matter. Joffrey stood off to one side, sporting a bandaged arm, and Sansa Stark was there too, weeping quietly. Kevan moved to stand near the front of the gathered lords and ladies, scanning the scene. The tension was palpable. Robert was red in the face, Cersei's eyes were glinting with venom, and Eddard's jaw was clenched. "It's a damned wolf," Robert bellowed. "A dire wolf bit my son? Or so I'm told. Where is the beast now?" Eddard tried to explain. "King Robert, it was a misunderstanding. My daughter Arya's wolf was startled. But," Cersei cut in, "your daughter's wolf savaged our son. And now that wolf is missing, because your daughter ran off, presumably to hide it." The boy Joffrey chimed in, voice trembling with indignation. "It bit me without cause." Bran spoke softly but firmly. "I saw what happened. Joffrey was threatening my sister's friend with his sword. The wolf only defended her." That remark drew a glare from the queen. Robert waved his arms to silence them all, sending spittle flying. "Gods, you'd think the realm has nothing better to fuss about than wolves biting princes. Fine. Where is this beast?" Eddard stepped forward. "Arya's wolf ran off into the woods. She's nowhere to be found. If it pleases your grace, I'll gladly pay restitution for any harm done to the prince, but there's no wolf to punish." Cersei's smile was frigid. "Then we punish the other wolf." A hush fell. Kevan realized with horror that Cersei was referring to the other direwolf the Starks had, the one belonging to Sansa, Lady, a gentle creature by all accounts. Eddard's eyes darkened. "Lady did nothing. She is a docile wolf. She's never harmed anyone." Cersei's gaze pinned Robert. "And yet we have a prince wounded, do we not? We must have justice. If one wolf is gone, the other must pay the price. We cannot let these beasts run loose, savage our children, and face no consequence." Joffrey nodded emphatically, eyes flicking to Sansa. "I want it dead." Robert looked torn, glancing at Ned Stark, at the tearful Sansa, at his own wife, and at the assembled court. The tension was thick enough to taste. Kevan could see the swirl in the king's mind. If he spared the wolf, it might look like he was weak, especially when his son bore a wound. If he killed it, he angered the Starks. But Cersei was pushing hard. With a roar of frustration, Robert bellowed, "Fine, do what you will. I'll have no more of this madness. It's a wolf, for the gods' sake." He sank back into the throne, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Ned, see to it quickly." Eddard's face was a picture of controlled anguish. He knew what was being asked of him. Sansa sobbed. Joffrey smirked. Cersei's lips curved with satisfaction. Kevan felt a surge of sympathy for the Starks, but also recognized the brutal logic. The king needed to be seen taking his son's side, especially if the story had grown beyond the truth. If the direwolf had indeed bitten the prince, justice of some sort was demanded by custom and by pride. Eddard stepped forward, voice low. "I will do it myself, then. Lady is of the North. She deserves better than a butcher." He turned, leading a weeping Sansa away. The crowd parted. Kevan caught Robert's eye, but the king only looked away, ashamed or exhausted, perhaps both. The throne room emptied, and Kevan followed slowly, mind spinning with the consequences. This small incident could have great repercussions for the Stark-Lannister alliance. Eddard would resent this cruelty, no matter how it was justified. Cersei's victory here might cost the realm more than a wolf's life. At length, Kevan departed the throne room, leaving Robert slumped on the Iron Throne and Cersei standing beside him, her hand resting on the lion's head pommel of her dagger, triumphant. Kevan thought of the debts, the hunts, the Targaryen threat, and now the brewing tension with the Starks. All these threads were pulling at the realm, threatening to unravel it. Kevan Lannister, the man who had never sought power, found himself at the heart of a storm that might one day tear the Seven Kingdoms apart. And all he could do was his duty, one day, one problem, one small victory at a time, hoping it would suffice to hold the realm together. Yet a nagging dread told him that storm clouds were gathering, and that before long, even the best-laid plans and the firmest hand might not be enough to keep the peace. But Kevan held fast to his resolve. He was Hand of the King. He would do what must be done, until the bitter end if need be. It was the only path he knew.